For today's video, we're going to be looking at the White Cemetery located in the small town of Talmadge, Maine. Now, as a warning, before we get started, this is an unscripted video, and this is based on my personal experiences, those of my employees, as well as other contractors that worked on this site and close to this site. With that, let's jump into the history. The White Cemetery dates back to the 1850s with at least 8 members of the White family buried on the property. Today, the cemetery is open to the public and is maintained by the town of White and Talmadge. For anyone from the area, you may recognize it as being located next to the old Maddox junkyard, which my salvage yard and my cousin's salvage yard, names excluded in this case for our privacy, had cleaned from July 4th, 2015 to 2019. And I took the final load of scrap out of there just months prior to the sale. Now, I do know who owns the property. I know how much it's sold for and everything. I am leaving these details out for privacy of the current property owners and the Maddox family. Most of this video will be based off of eyewitness accounts of myself, my employees, as well as my ex and several others who have been on this property after the cleanup began. With that said, some information has been changed, names have been left out, and in some situations, dates have also been changed in order to protect the privacy of everybody involved. Now, if we go back in time and look at how is the White family and the Maddox property correlated? Well, the White family lived in the house that's in the very back from, I would say, probably 1850s to approximately 1920s based on the information we found and what was in the house. Now, the house that I'm talking about is located approximately 200 feet back from US Route 1 or Holton Road, as most people would know it up there. Now, you can't see this house because there's the mobile home in the way in the front, as well as the trees that are along the wood line right there where the other house is located. That is now collapsing in on itself. And the house in the very back has long since collapsed. I do actually remember the day the front wall collapsed, and I was actually working on the property when that happened. What sets this job site apart for that back house in particular is we've had accounts of voices back there. Here, one of my employees seen a girl, and I won't say my employee's age in this situation, but seen a girl approximately her age, which would be Ruth White. Ruth White died at the age of 17 of TB in 1912. And I can say I've seen Ruth on this property. I've seen Kobe on this property. And I've seen and heard multiple other apparitions and voices on this property. And I can verify nobody was around at the time. There was no hunters. There was nobody out. There wasn't even traffic going by at this time. Now, when does activity become more active? Activity picks up after 6 p.m. at night. I've been on this property at 10 o'clock at night, sitting there waiting with now my ex, but at the time we were dating, and we were waiting for a friend. And it's one night I will not forget. So this night in particular stands out to me because it's the most active night I know of on this property. So this would have been mid-2015. This would have been right after we started the cleanup. So it would have been around probably August or September. And we went there to meet a friend. This was around 10 o'clock at night. I had my Explorer. I backed in. I backed almost up to the bus. And this was actually done on purpose. And we had known that people could be hiding on the property at night. Unfortunately, I can say nobody ever wanted to step foot on this property at night after this. Now, I have after this fact, and it was because I was still working when it was getting dark those nights, and I was traveling only 2 miles, so I didn't really care. But this night in particular, me and my ex, were sitting there, and she asked me, "Did you hear that?" And we're both sitting there No radio, nothing on. Nobody's on the property that we are aware of. And all of a sudden, we hear a loud bang. We both got out of the truck. I used my flashlight from my cell phone. C had just a regular flashlight because he was using my phone at the time. And when we looked back at the little tiny bus, which I believe was a 1953 Chevrolet, it could have been a GMC, I can't remember right offhand. I had the horn button somewhere. But the bus's door was wide open, and when we arrived, that bus door was closed. Now, the creepy part about this is C ran back into the woods down the road because there was a road going into the property, and C seen a shadow figure. I seen the exact same thing C seen. While C was doing that, I was listening, and all of a sudden there was no sounds, nothing coming from that area. And I went and checked the other two buses, which were 72 passengers each. Now, both buses at this point had been cleaned out, and I believe we had the fourth bus up there as well. I can't remember right offhand. But if that was the case, then I had walked down the side of that bus and also checked its windows to make sure nobody was hiding in the bus. Now, for a safety tip for anybody, I don't care how old you are or anything, and never do what we did here. The only reason I did this is I'm trained to defend myself if I have to. And my ex at the time, she had a knife on her. So I knew she was all right back there. Yeah. But there was always a suspicion that when you went past those trees, it's like you switched into a different reality, if that makes sense to anybody out there. So when she came back up, I'm trying to make sure I don't use her name in this situation. She actually said that she followed a guy run back there, and he just vanished just before the house. She don't remember anything in that 5 minute span after that. And what's kind of funny is I also have a period where I don't remember 2 or 3 minutes there. But I can say, as I was walking back to the Explorer, I shined my light into the woods because I literally heard somebody run through those woods and run across that road. But what's funny is I could see the entire road from where I was standing and past the tree line right there. There was nobody that was there. And that's exactly right where the cemetery is today. I didn't know this was where the cemetery was at the time, so keep that in mind. I thought the cemetery was further back because I had tried to locate it after I had talked to a relative of the White family on the property probably a few weeks prior to this. And the thing with this is this isn't the only account of this happening. And this isn't all the details from that night. There's also believed to have been 2 other spirits that night seen. We actually went back 2 or 3 nights after and took some photos. Unfortunately, I do not know what happened to these photos today. But we have pictures of orbs in the grass, well, hovering above the grass. I have a bright orb in the school bus. We actually debunked this. We thought, okay, that has to be a light reflecting in the bus. We went back next day, and this is, I believe, 2 days prior to the bus being cut in half to be hauled out of there for scrap. There was no light in that school bus at all. And this was right above the driver's seat. Now, who could this have been? We don't know. Do I have suspicions? Yes. I do believe this might have been Kobe because he did live in this bus at one point. Now, if we go back to the mobile home in the back, there was only something off about that mobile home, and I've never been able to put my finger on. I do know some history now about it. I cannot share in this video, for privacy reasons. But I will say that it's linked to one of the families that lived on the property. and the trailer was last lived in 1967, according to the calendar on the wall. Unfortunately, what was also tied to this trailer is not something anybody wants to ever see. So, one of my employees, my ex, and myself, we've all witnessed one thing, and I don't know if it was a shapeshifter or something else. I also kind of have a suspicion that of what it could have been, and I won't go into details for privacy of my own family in this case, but it was, to make it easy way, it was like a wolf's head on a person's body. And I've seen it once. The one thing that there's only my report of, and that is a doppelganger, and that was my ex. He was literally across the road checking for any scrap on that side of the road because we had to clean both sides. It's under the contract, and she was still over on that side, and I seen her walking literally past the house in the front. It was 10 minutes later. I was walking back up with a transmission, and this is one of the old cast iron transmissions that didn't even weigh 50 to 100 pounds. And, and I asked her, well, weren't you just walking towards the truck bed over there? And she just looked at me like I had two heads, and she said, no. Oh, and I told her what I seen, and that's when she came out and told me that when she was across the street, that she was hearing and seeing things over there that she couldn't explain, and she thought I would think she was crazy. Unfortunately, there is a cemetery on that side of the road, but we don't know exactly where today. And I'm only aware of the cemetery because it's in the DOT records. It is not permitted. It's not in the DHS records or anything. Now, if we move up to the house in the front of the Maddox property, this house I have no history on. Part of it was built later on. The front half of the house is way older, probably early 1900s. Now, last time I went by, the leaves were still off the trees, and that entire roof is now collapsed in. Which, when we worked there was literally a record player holding the ceiling up at that point. So we had been in there? Of course not, but we had to clean the house out still. The main thing with that house is when it was quiet and nobody else was on the property, if I was there alone, I literally heard a woman's voice in there. And I don't know if this was residual energy or if this was also a possible intelligent haunting. And I believe it's both in this situation. Now, if we move forward to May of 2018, this was just months prior to the property being done, and I was standing there next to my truck. It was probably 6 o'clock at night. I backed in. I was backed into a different area than I usually back into because I didn't have my trailer attached. I left my trailer down at the house down near Lincoln, Maine. That was 40 miles away. But I was standing there, and all of a sudden I hear a man and woman talking to each other. And I'm just standing there listening. And then all of a sudden I heard one say hi to me. And this was literally like they were standing right next to me. I turned around, nobody was there. And I knew nobody was on the property because I had already been up in the very back and everything. And as I'm standing there, that's when I heard him tell her, it's all right, he can be here. Yeah, the other one is not wanted here. And I knew exactly what that meant. And I won't go into details on that, but it is believed that this property was Indian burial ground at one point, which would be linked to what is today Indian Township, Maine, which just happens to be the next town over past Waite. Now, I don't know any history on this. I don't know if that's true. I do know where we lived in Topsfield, there was 2 Indian burial sites on that property, and wherever we took off the Maddox property, I can verify followed us home. And we still don't know what that was. But after the scrap loads left, the activity at the house slowed down. So if we go and look at the full accounts that we have, I've seen Ruth White, Kobe Maddox, Ruth's parents. I've heard man and woman talking on the property. We have residual energy. We have a wolf figure, doppelgangers, which, as most people are aware, you never want to see your own doppelganger. And seeing this is usually a sign of imminent danger or worse. And in this situation, I think this was actually a warning sign for what was to come years later. Or in this case, was warning me about my now ex, which that's a very long story I'm not going to go into. But the property itself, if we include all the accounts, what my cousin's seen, what I seen, what my employee's seen, what my ex seen, what another employee's seen, and I'll just say one of my employees, he was a teenager at the time. Under Maine law, you can work for our companies as long as you're under direct supervision from the age of 16 on. But what she's seen on that property, there's one thing she's seen that she never opened up to me about, but she came actually running from where the trailer was. I was back about 200 feet into the woods because I was walking down there. I believe it was a 1938 Dodge, and she came running over. I don't remember what exactly she asked me, but I told her no, and I seen the look in her eyes. I even told her, "Why don't you stay with me, and we'll finish this up." And that's what we did. We just loaded the rest of the trailer because I don't think I had anything in the truck bed time, and I just strapped everything down. We headed back to the garage, which was 40 miles away. Hey, and to this day, I don't know exactly what she's seen. But I will say, based on what we found, and as far as I can tell, every member of the White family is still haunting this property. And we have Kobe haunting it. Then we have the pot most people are not aware of. So when the cleanup first began, there was a cross still nailed to the telephone pole up front. Now, unfortunately, this cross is today across the street. I'd never had time to rehang it back up after I got done working there. And the plan was to put another cross up. I do not know the history of what happened or anything, but I have heard a story that there was a fatal on that, right on that corner, and it is a dangerous corner. I will admit that, because you can't see if you're coming from Topsfield way around that corner till you're right on top of it. And it is believed that there's multiple other spirits on this property. If we go back and look at the whole history of Waite, Talmadge, and Topsfield, 90% of the properties are haunted. And a good example of this, I was walking back. It was middle of winter. My ex was at the junkyard cleanup. I was walking back to go get truck that we were using at the time because we got right up there and make it easier so we could stop making a pile. Well, I'm just walking back. I'm probably a mile back, so I'm only a half mile from the house. And all of a sudden, I heard a woman scream. And I thought, okay, maybe that was her back there. But when I got back up there probably 45 minutes later, she told me no, but she was hearing strange things up there. Now, this isn't the first time I've heard a woman scream. I was sitting over on Route 6 one night, in Topsfield, Maine, and I heard similar while sitting over at over near the lake, and it's not something you forget. Some people might equate this to being the call of a banshee, and they wouldn't be wrong. And what's unfortunate is we know the brother of somebody that was killed on that road just weeks after I heard this. And I'm not gonna release names or anything for that. But about 6 months later, we know what happened, and the report doesn't sit right with any of us to this day. But me and my ex, we were driving back to the house. I think I had my Explorer or we had the Chevy at the time. I can't remember. But we were driving back, and all of a sudden we both looked, and we both said at the same time, "What is that ahead of us?" There was a white figure floating, and when we hit that, we knew exactly who it was and what it was. And we believe it was his way of saying that you guys are right. What happened is not the true story. Like I said, I will not release information on this, but this isn't the first time that's happened to me. Another area that's also linked to the Maddox cleanup for this would be another site I did where there's a woman and her baby buried. I know some details. Again, I cannot verify, so I will not share those details. But I was working on the school bus on that property. Now, this bus, had the option. I could take it for free or I could pay. I paid the owner for it. I was working on this bus for a good few months. I'm just standing there one day and I'm working over at Kobe's at the same time, pretty much. I'm going back and forth every other day, and all of a sudden I'm standing there and I heard a woman call my name. Well, I will say I was out of there within minutes. And I don't know if that was the woman with her baby. I do know my father reported when he lived in the house behind this property, he would hear a woman and her baby in the upstairs bedroom. And that house is known to be her final home. I've heard a couple of different stories about this, and the most common is that they were involved in a horse and buggy accident in the late 1800s. Now, are they actually buried on the property? That is unknown. The stones are there. I can verify it. I cleaned them off one day when I was working up there. Yeah, just to show respect for the two deceased. And out of all the properties I've ever worked on, that property and the Maddox White Cemetery properties are the only 3 properties I've ever said a prayer over when working there. I'm not religious. Anybody that knows me knows I'm spiritual. And there was just something about these properties that stood out to me. My ex, he also has admitted to saying prayers over the property. And as far as I'm aware today, there has been no activity reported. The last time I left that property, I was with a friend, and she noticed that I was walking ahead of her and I was looking down. What she didn't realize is I was saying a final prayer over the property, and that day is the day I told any spirits that are on the property that this will be the last time I'm on the property. It has sold. I know who the property owners are, and to treat them right in this case. While I might not be a fan of the property owners, I do have to still respect who originally owned this property. The property today is still in cleanup, and I'll just say that the property probably never will be completely cleaned. It needs to be completely clear cut, and it's going to need a ripper blade run through it, as well as probably a controlled burn done just to find everything. There's still vehicles on the property up in the very back. There's 3 vehicles I know of. There's hoods, truck beds, um, tons of miscellaneous stuff, and yeah, I took over 20,000 pounds per week out of there. Last count I knew, between my yard and my cousin's yard, we were over 20 million pounds of metal removed. And that's just from what I know of. But for anybody that wants to visit the White Cemetery, it is open. They have cut a path into the net from Route 1. And yeah, I just don't recommend going there at night. That's the one thing I don't recommend. If we look at who's haunting the property, again, we have Ruth White. She was 17 when she passed. Her parents are both buried on the property. We have several others. I have the stones pictured here earlier on in the video if anybody wants to look at the names. And yeah, if anybody goes on the property, all I'll say is enter the property with respect. No, there is no. So as far as I know, there are friendly spirits, all of them. And keep in mind, none of this is scripted. So yes, I am kind of off track in places. And if we do the math in total, we probably have around 12 to 15 spirits on the property that are known. And as I said, all I'll say is if you visit, pay your respects to them. They won't harm you. They're curious more than anything. And with that, thank you for joining me for this, and hopefully you enjoyed it. And I can do more like this if anybody's interested, but if you like this, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. It really does help our channel, and I will catch you in the next video.